Take you out after.
Welcome to the Smoke and Rope Podcast. I am Ryan Basore, your host as always, and today is episode 21. Excited to have on the show today Matt Abel, one of the godfathers of Michigan cannabis and in the country. Matt, thank you for being on the show, man.
Thanks for having me on, Ryan. Good to see you.
Yep, I'm excited. And today we got a little change of pace. My three co-hosts, Tom Beller at Real Leaf. Tom, I love the new background.
Thank you, Ryan.
Tom, and then Kevin Pybus over at Truu Cannabis. Kevin, how you doing?
Doing good, buddy. Hanging in there. How you doing?
Good. And special co-host today, Josh Hovey over at Martin Waymeyer, who is also, of course, Prop 1 spokesman. And we're going to get in a little bit of cannabis legalization anniversaries today as well. So, Josh, thanks for being on today.
Hey, it's good to be back.
All right. So I wanted to give Matt a little introduction, kind of how I remember meeting Matt and my kind of take on Matt's history. He can correct me and, all that afterwards. But I first met Matt back in 2010, early on, through Rick Ferris, Big Daddy over in Oak Park. And I became one of the first members of Cannabis Patients United. And it was a group of marijuana lawyers, activists, and business owners. And we started lobbying the state and got involved with Matt that early on. And then also with Michigan Association of Compassion Centers, we always use Matt as an expert lawyer and kept it going. Matt was at all the protests we were at. He's been doing this a long, long time before that, and that's what I'm going to ask him about. But I still remember this week's had a lot of nostalgia for me. It's 1 year since we did the first buy of legalization for Michigan, and I was able to purchase those joints and gift them to John Sinclair, and that's a year later. So that's exciting for me. A great honor. Still have them. Have not smoked them. He gifted me some back, and then this week also was the 10-year anniversary to the day by the National Guard and the DEA and the state police in Okemos for a state legal grow, and made me think about how far we've come. But I got on the news the next day and then was yelling to the rooftops about it. And the following day, I get a call from Matt, and he tells me, Ryan, what are you doing? Shut the F up. And I was so naive back then, and I just couldn't believe it. But Matt had already been around long enough and was trying to teach me some lessons that I know now. So I was thinking about that before we had you on, Matt. Remember that, and thank you. In 2012, Matt was leading the charge for the first legalization effort, Repeal Today. And then again in 2016, am I legalized? Original board member, pushing hard on that. And then, of course, with Prop 1, am I legalized component, Matt is one of the main authors of the law and has been there every step of the way, even before that as well. Well-known business attorney, Cannabis Counsel, is famous in Detroit. I was down in Detroit on Friday with Jamie Lowell and John Sinclair, and John was talking about how proud he was of you when you made that switch and went for it. So love to hear about that in a little bit. And then the other thing is I'm in Lansing, and I rent a room in office in Covert Law, and Josh is always talking about you're one of his idols, and he's on you heavy. And we really try to be the Cannabis Counsel of Lansing over here where we're at. So we're kind of copying you a little bit and kind of the same culture. So with that, Matt, thanks for being on. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing, and then I'd like to hear about kind of some of your activisms pre 2008 because it's fascinating. I don't know enough about it. I've been thinking a lot about people like you this week that were doing it before people like us. So thanks, Matt.
Well, thank you, Ryan. Thanks a lot for having me on. And it's always good to see Josh and get to know him during the Am I Legalized campaign. And Kevin and Tom, good to meet you guys. Well, we've met, but good to see you again and work with you here. Boy, there's so many things. I don't know where to start. I hadn't even remembered that phone call to you back after you got busted. So that brings back some memories too. It's funny because, you know, I really enjoy being a marijuana lawyer. It's different every day. As I was joking before we came on, I have kind of a short attention span. So I always like change and different stuff. And with cannabis law, it evolves. And it's been a really interesting trajectory. For me, after my son, who's now 20, almost 26, was born, I had taken some time off. And when I went back to work, I worked for Buck Davis and Cindy Heenan at Constitutional Litigation Associates, and they're awesome. They do mostly Section 1983 federal suits against the cops for beating people up. And we're still really good friends to this day, and they're how I got involved with the National Lawyers Guild, which is a lefty lawyers organization, and really on top of it, defending the protesters, et cetera. But Buck and Cindy just said to me, you know, when I said this civil litigation at the time, suing the cops, it was such an uphill battle every day. And it wasn't really for me. And they said, well, just stay here and do what you want to do. And at that point, I had done a lot of criminal defense, although I'd been in a general practice earlier with divorces and real estate, probate, and civil litigation. I could do whatever I wanted to do. And I was doing a lot of criminal defense, and the other lawyers were laughing at me when I had a card with the sativa and the indica leaf on it, that you just couldn't be a marijuana lawyer. You know, there wasn't enough work. And then, you know, a decade later, those people are saying I was a genius about it. And neither one really. I just was I had the luxury to be able to follow my heart and to spend some uncompensated time on activist work, and I still am and do, and but I do a lot of, you know, retained work as well, and I'm lucky enough to have been able to build the practice. So I was a solo marijuana lawyer out there in the wilderness for years back in the day when Dr. Whitty and Mike Segesta and Dan Solano and Cindy Heenan we had a drug policy forum in Detroit that met at their law firm. But after that, when the medical marijuana law passed, well, I worked with Greg Schmid and the PRA 2000 back then. I have a PRA t-shirt from back then, and just circulated petitions, and Greg's a dear friend now. And then, you know, worked on legalization efforts several more times. But and I circulated petitions for the medical marijuana law in 2008. I didn't have anything to do with the drafting. And that's one of the things I complained to Marijuana Policy Project so much and so long about, some of the really simple corrections that could have been made to the MMMA way back then, that I think that's why they allowed me to be on the drafting committee with 20 or so other people. They just wanted to shut me up. They were tired of hearing it. And I mean, one of my biggest beefs, there's still language in the MMMA that says a patient can grow outdoors, and that an outdoor grow is considered an enclosed lock facility if it's enclosed on all sides but the base by chain link, wood slats, or a similar material. Enclosed on all sides by chain link, wood slats, or a similar material. That whole phrase right there just doesn't, and it's never been clarified. People still don't know whether you need a roof if you're growing outdoors. So never ends, you know. I'm so glad we had the MMMA. Then we got the legislature finally passed the Facilities Licensing Act for all its imperfections, and then they didn't expect that we were going to have legalization coming along quite so soon. I think because they wrote it that the tax went away after adult use passed. So that's why there hadn't been much tax money yet. So.
I appreciate that, Matt. And that's like one of the reasons we like doing this show too, is to kind of record some of the history and make sure everyone remembers it. And I'm just really getting fascinated about the pre-stuff. And, like one big news, you are Mr. Detroit Marijuana. So the new ordinance is passed and it's happening. Can you fill us in on that ordinance, what it's kind of about? When do you think it's going to be actually active and we'll have rec in Detroit?
Well, the ordinance is fairly unique. It was passed by the city council, either last week or the week before. It takes effect on January 11th, which is the second Monday of January. But all that happens in the beginning is that legacy applicants can be certified as such. And those are people who have basically lived in Detroit for 15 years. There are a few permutations of it, but so half of the licenses are going to go to legacy applicants. And so they'll allow people to be certified as legacy applicants in January and February. And then they open up licensing applications March 1st. So
Like 60 days, right?
No, I'm sorry. The city will begin accepting, I'm still fresh to me. City will begin accepting applications for adult use marijuana licenses on April 1 and shall review the license applications submitted by April 30th within the time period set forth. So that's the April 1 to April 30th is the time where people can file applications who are legacy or who have current current facilities of any type going. And then in June, there's a special, June and July, special reserved review period where the city will review the applications for adult use from holders of licenses from medical marijuana facilities. So they're going to basically give the legacy the first shot, the current medical marijuana licensees the second shot, and finally, if there's space available after that, people who are not in either of those two categories. So it's going to be tough. There are going to be 75 dispensaries, which there already are allowed that number under medical. There's going to be 75 35 micro businesses and 35 consumption lounges is what it is. So again, all of those are going to be one-to-one, one legacy to one non-legacy. So let's play this through. They say about 46 dispensaries licensed in the city. Might be a couple more by now. Say there are 50 dispensaries licensed in the city of the 75 that are going to be licensed, because we know there certainly are some in the pipeline that'll complete it in the next few weeks. So all 50 of those, well, and of them, perhaps the city said they think 4 are owned by Detroiters. So let's say even 5 of them are legacies. So that makes 45 that are not legacies. So when they start issuing licenses, they're going to issue 1 legacy and 1 to this group of 45 who's a non-legacy. Well, when you hit 37, 38 is the 75th one as you pair them. And so anybody, they say they're going to do, once you submit your application, they're going to do a random draw for the order in which they're reviewed. And so if you're above number 37, they say, well, you'll just have to partner with a legacy applicant to do that, which means you'd be forced to sell a majority stake in your business to somebody you might not even know. But regardless, I mean, businesses, personal relationships aren't always an issue, but still, be required to sell. And so I would imagine there might be some litigation over this, but talking about litigation over it, and stop me if I'm running on too long, there is this crazy section. It's on page 17. It says, let me just read this sentence. The city council is exercising discretion to permit adult use establishments as supported by the legal opinion of the court counsel that the ordinance is lawful, and on the condition that the legacy applicants be prioritized in accordance with the legislative purpose of this ordinance. And here, should any provision of this ordinance governing adult use marijuana establishments be ruled invalid, unconstitutional, or struck down by a court of law, subsection B, which licenses all of it, will be thereto repealed, and future adult use marijuana establishments will be prohibited, excluding those previously licensed, which shall continue in effect until their expiration date, after which time they will not be renewed. So if any provision of this gets struck down, the whole thing, they're not going to do any licenses. So if you own a company in Ferndale, you might want to sue just to make sure the Detroit thing doesn't happen. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of silly. I'm not sure that that provision is constitutional. I think it may well be against public policy to put that kind of a, what do they call it, a poison pill in there.
Yeah, basically it just says sue us and we'll blow the whole thing up. So yeah, it's kind of.
And it will affect everyone. And I don't think that's, you know, and there's a place in the ordinance, they need to make a correction. There's a section that includes the growers as the 50-50 licensees with the legacy applicants, but then in the next section, it required everything but growers. So it's a little contradictory. I think they just left it out. But even for growers, there's going to be one legacy. And is that a 100 plant grow and then one other 2,000 plant grow? Or are they, you know, 100 to 100? It's not clear that way. But still, and with no limit on the number of grows, I don't know why they would require them to be paired with legacies. No limit on grows or processors or transporters or labs, of course.
Hey,
I
Matt,
know what it was. So 75 provisioning centers, medical, 75 provisioning centers, or adult use retail stores. So those are going to be the same places.
Hey, Matt, this is Kevin Pybus over at Truu Cannabis. We haven't had a chance to meet, but you're one of the guys that I've heard about for years and years about litigating cannabis cases in Michigan. I've talked to so many people over the years that have told me, oh yeah, I went and saw Matt Abel and he did this or he did that. And it was always good news. It was always, you had got them out of something, which I always thought was impressive. But you know, when we're talking about these bills, you've read a ton of them. I've read a ton of them as we worked through writing legislation and writing these ordinances and helping out municipalities get their stuff in order. How do you feel about the situation where language is written incredibly vague in a lot of cases, and then it's just left up for interpretation? And then in a lot of cases, the interpreter is sometimes the police officers, right? You know, with the lockbox situation, with the top on an outdoor grow, these things have been misinterpreted and enforced by state police officers, county sheriffs, and it doesn't ever get addressed until somebody gets charged and is put into a situation where they have to defend themselves, and then it gets litigated in court, and then it's found that these things aren't legal. How do you feel about that process? And how do we ever get to a point where we're able to somehow rectify that or put it in a way that it's not so detrimental to someone, an individual, to figure out what they wanted to say in a bill? You know what I mean?
Right. No, I agree with you that words have meaning, and the Michigan legislature defined marijuana as cannabis sativa L, and I spent a decade getting people better deals because I would argue the prosecutor had to prove that it was sativa. It's not good enough if it turns purple on a roadside PB, whatever, a test, because they said it, if they meant to make it all marijuana, why did they further define it, or I can't think of the word right now, but restrict it by using the word sativa? They could have just said marijuana is defined as cannabis, period. But when they said cannabis sativa, that implies that if it's not cannabis sativa, but it's cannabis indica or cannabis ruderalis, if there is such a thing, and granted that they're saying that doesn't really, that those are fake dichotomies. I mean, they might actually be different genus or of the same species, or something like that. But and talking about that, there's the US hired a couple of Canadians to write this study about 20 years ago saying that it's all sativa. And that's the only study I've ever read that said it. It was government funded bullshit that let the cops argue that this is all sativa instead of making the legislature go back and change the law. A judge, and I was arguing in front of in Detroit, told me once, he's like, Mr. Abel, if you ever win this argument, the legislature's just going to change the law. And I'm like, yeah, and they should, I mean, I didn't write this.
It's not about being vague. It's about people knowing what the law is. If I don't know the law, then how can I be guilty of committing a crime that I didn't know the law? You know what I mean? It's
right. I agree. And there's language in the medical marijuana law that says it's to be interpreted in the best interest of the patients and all that. But that's, you never get a court to cite that or rely on that for anything. I mean, you just need compassionate judges who understand this stuff. And there are some, but I'd say, not half. But generationally, as more and more people, I mean, some of the older people are still, and I'm an old guy now, I have a gray beard and everything, but some of the people of generation 1 and 2 up from me still believe that it's reefer madness. And although medical marijuana and now legalization have really changed that a lot, because now that grandma can get a cookie and she can sleep, and now that she can buy it in a store and she knows that it's 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams, I think is really an excellent thing, because I overdosed myself on edibles so many times I stopped doing them.
Me too.
But now that I can buy, 5 milligram and titrate it and take one day and 2 the next day and see how it happens, it's all good. Yesterday I took 20 milligrams and I was happy, but 10 in the morning, 10 in the afternoon, and
all good.
That's what
it's different though, because I like to, have a couple puffs at night, right? As kind of a nightcap, but you can't do that with edibles. You'll be up all night. So you kind of have to be a day drinker if you're going to be doing edibles. You know what I mean?
I don't know. I think our endocannabinoid systems are different. I take an edible, I'm out cold, but you just reminded me, Matt, like I used to always hear growing up, ignorance of the law is no excuse. I was always told that. And then once the Medical Marijuana Act passed and cops were out busting people and hadn't even read the law, our criminal justice system said it was all right. Ignorance of the law is okay for cops, but not for citizens. And that just drove me nuts.
Absolutely. I mean, partly it's on us to change the law too. I mean, shame on me for not writing my legislator and saying, this is a serious problem. This phrase needs to be changed. But I don't want to open up the medical marijuana law. I don't want to open up it's concerning, because that's where the caregiver protections are as well. And, once you open up the medical marijuana law, there could be unintended consequences. So as much as I'd like to change the outdoor growing, and so people ask me, does it need a roof? And I tell them, I don't know. If it was me, I'd put chicken wire over it, just to keep the rabbits out or whatever. But who knows? And the crazy thing, when they wrote it in the first place, to say chain link or wood slats or a similar material. Well, those two aren't similar to each other in the first place. So what the hell is similar to chain link and wood slats?
No, as we're talking about the anniversary of going rec in Michigan and Detroit going rec, but I have a question about that. But first, I want to kind of tag team what Kevin was saying about, your, the legend of Matt Abel. I have a quick story I just want to share with everyone. One of the first times I was hanging out with Matt, we were at the Cannabis Cup in Clio. And, I think he and I were on a panel there and giving a little talk. But then afterwards, we're walking around all the booths. And I would say probably every other booth we went to, someone was coming up to Matt and thanking them for saving their ass. And they would give him a handful of free joints or whatever product they had. And, this guy walked away not spending a dime and had like a baggy full of goodies. And, that's the legend of Matt Abel right there. I just want to share.
Thanks, Josh.
My question for Matt, what if you could wave a magic wand and change anything about either the 2018 law or any of, we talked about the medical law, but let's focus on 2018. If you could change anything about the rec law without having to screw up the rest or worry about it getting opened up and tinkered with too much, what would you fix as one of the authors of this legislation?
Well, first of all, it applies to people 21 and over. I started smoking when I was 15, and I have 4 college degrees, and I'm an Eagle Scout. So, it'd be amazing what I could have done without it, But so perhaps to lowering the age, just making it more available, making it less of a criminal thing. I think there needs to be more opportunity for small businesses. Certainly, I'm concerned about that's my dog telling me that the multi-state operators, Sasha, a couple of minutes and I'll take you out, I promise. So the multi-state operators are going to accumulate a lot of the smaller, especially growers and dispensaries. So there's that. I'd like to see more municipalities do it. I'd like to see any municipality really embrace it in a way with some really good city planning. One of the things that aggravates me about the Detroit ordinance, it says you can't have more than one licensed business not more than one retail store, at least in the same building. And 420 here now, kids, just saying. Let's see, I think I would take out the secure transporters. I think that's redundant, as I argued at the time, because you've already got seed to sale tracking, and the growers could have done their own transporting. They just would, and maybe they would want to hire it out anyway. When we were in the discussions, somebody argued to me that it was going to be so efficient and effective that the growers and processors and retailers were all going to want to use the secure transporters. I said, great, make it voluntary.
That was the Beer and Wine Distributors Association trying to get their hands on this industry. It got axed at the last minute because the Beer and Wine Distributors Association are federally licensed. And had they actually got a marijuana license, it would have jeopardized their federal license. When they found that out, they bailed. The transporter stayed in, but that's why it happened, if anybody wants to know.
Okay. Yeah, the whole transporter situation, it's your, as a grower, the person or a processor, that's the person that you're sending to represent your company. And a lot of the time, you don't get to choose who that person is. That's the face of your company delivering your product. And, it's an unfortunate thing. As a small business owner, I want to go, in person and have the option to do that, to be the face and say, here's some samples, but we can't do that. And it doesn't fall in line with how other states are handling the transport situation either. But make it voluntary, but
right.
Have an option for us if we want to buy a vehicle and, bond it, GPS, and do all the same things that transporters have to do. We should be allowed to. You
have to meet that requirement, absolutely. And maybe the restriction that growing licenses only be granted in agricultural or industrial areas. The cities can decide that. If they have some vacant commercial areas, maybe that ought to be allowed as well. So, and then there are parts of it like the opt out where a city's automatically opted in unless they opt out. And that's just kind of not being honored. Director Brisboe addressed that this morning and indicated that, I mean, the clerk has to fill out some kind of form. And so the form, if they don't have an ordinance, says that this facility is not in violation of any city ordinances. Not that it's allowed by ordinance, but it's not prohibited. And you might sometimes have to sue to get the clerk to sign the damn form if the clerk personally doesn't like it, or those are, so there's that. I'm sure I could probably think of some other stuff, but on the whole, it's really nice to be able to walk into a clean licensed store and buy a tested product. I still like a lot of bud, but trying to protect my lungs a little. So now that we've got gummies that are 5 and 10 milligrams, but still, it's, you have to plan your day a little better, you know.
I was wondering how, if you had any kind of insight, you know, that the state's kind of playing with the idea of merging the two bills together into, I've seen it. It seems to be, there's some questions that I have personally, but I wanted to get your take on that.
Well, I always, you know, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm always pretty straight up about it. I'll try to be diplomatic. The director said that he came up with this idea in order to make his life easier for all practical purposes, right? I mean, that's their running theory, that they're trying to combine these so there's only one license and it should just be smoother administratively, which is not the end all and be all. I mean, maybe it would make things smoother administratively, but, you know, anyway. Other people have a theory that the large growers really did this in order to be able to sell more of their medical product into the recreational market. Sorry, I got dog howling at me here. But, and that may be true. I'm not in a hurry to combine them. I've seen draft 8, and it still has some issues with the combining the medical and the recreational. Excuse me a moment.
Matt's dog says it's 4:20, and what's going on? Why aren't you taking care of business?
Got a turtle head poking.
Well, let's talk about that amongst ourselves for a second. I mean, Kevin and Tom, what are you guys feeling about that idea right now?
Yeah, you know, from the whole premise thing, I have a major problem with it. I don't even want to really look at the ingredients of the bill at this point. I'm just about the whole premise. Right now, I can't get past that. For me, I'm a small business owner. I've tried to play things the right way. I don't know that I've always done things the right way as far as business wise, but you know, I did a lot of investing to get to where I'm at, and all the way they've changed the rules continuously over and over. And so the first was allowing caregiver product into the license system. You know, I've got friends of mine that have made a ton of money bringing licensed product into the system and never paid a dime in licensing fees, none of that stuff. Where I've had to participate, I've had to pay. At least I should get back my fee for paying for the first year while they allowed caregiver product to come through. But the bottom line is that I don't want any more changes. This isn't meant to be merged yet. The reason that they want to merge it is because they are getting pressure from the big growers. The big growers are having problems right now. They're in a cash pinch. Their way hasn't gone exactly as planned. And the best way for them to be able to get a hold on this market is to run the small guy out. So, we've seen it in other states. There's a race to the bottom as far as money goes. And when prices get down to $1,800 a wholesale pound, the people that benefit the most are the people that are growing the most. The small guy can't survive in a world like that. And I don't want to race to get to that line, right? That's the first thing. And then the second thing, when we do talk about a little bit about the meat and potatoes of the bill, when I got into it, I saw this area where they relieved the state police from any responsibility as far as having kind of any, responsibilities or defined duties. And then what they did was then they opened up this language where it says they can then assist the MRA in enforcement, and then it doesn't have a cap on how much money they can spend in their assisting, whether it's buying, armored tanks or whatever they're gonna do, or spending money on more cameras or whatever it is. I don't really want to have to pay for it out of my licensing fee. And so what we've seen so far was we've seen a drastic dip here recently in the licensing fee. We're down to $21,000, I think, for a Class C grow in a dispensary. And I think that if we change that bill and we open that up to where there's an open end for the state police, we're going to see huge licensing fee increases. And it's going to become one of those things like we have in a lot of cities where, well, we get so much money, we've got to spend it or else we won't get it again next year. I don't want to play that with my licensing fee. We're set where we are. Let's just continue the path forward. There's extra money. Let's give it back to the people. That's my take.
Yeah, I feel that another problem is you're opening up an act, right? That was voted on by the people. And just by changing a few words here and there, you can make it no longer an act.
Right.
And not just that, but if it was really about making it easy, there's a few small changes in metric you can have the state require metric to make, which is the seed to sale tracking. If you don't know what metric is, that would allow businesses to essentially operate as if they were as the two acts were combined, using the lowest common denominator of each act that it's already written that way anyway. When they rewrote it, they essentially said you got to go by the lowest common denominator. But if you could allow transfer of flower products or processed goods in between your medical or your recreational license, and you just do that through a few small changes in metric, there's no need to go through and rewrite everything.
I would agree, Tom, 100%.
Speaking on that, on what you had to say, Kevin, on the police issue and the big growers cash crunched. It's a little rumor. I take it as credible. There was there's a raid in Ingham County, not signed by a local prosecutor. It was the Marijuana Enforcement Division. Caregiver grow. They got there halfway through. They got the cards to prove it was legal, and they still took all the plants. Just happened, is what I heard. So that's interesting. But then. Also, you talk about the race to bottom and these guys hurting, like, a month ago when the market turned upside down, we saw those big growers go from 3,500 and $4,000 a pound to $2,000 overnight, and they had to liquidate because the good growers and the people planned ahead that I know sat on it and they expected it. But if you need to cut your prices in half overnight, you're probably in a cash crunch. So I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I'd heard Ryan a little bit about that rate as well, and it was my understanding that it was an issue with labeling cards or something on the door of your grow room as their excuse as to why they took the plants. But that to me is again an interpretation of the law. Matt, you might have some input on that. Is it required to have labels on each door? Is it required to have labels on plants? It's a
decade ago shit.
Yeah.
I mean, it may or may not be a good idea, but it's never been required. And there's and so that's allowed some people to get away with, I've had people tell me they have 2 or more gardens and, on the same cards, and that's not legal, but because you're not required to post the cards, it makes it easier that way. I tell people, you're not required to post the cards, but if I had a medical garden, I would put the cards, I would enlarge the front of them, put them up on the inside of the garden so that if and when the cops break down the door, they can't later say they didn't know that it was a medical garden. I don't want to show on the outside. I wouldn't want anybody to know there's a garden if they're in my basement or whatever it is.
Well, I used to take it a step further, Matt, and that was, I would also label the plants, and I would put an actual plant tag on my plants with the patient's name and number on it. And listen, like you said, you know what? It's not one of those things that's required, but when somebody comes into your garden and they see that, like, okay, this guy's actually kind of taking it seriously, maybe that changes their opinion of the whole situation. You never know. But yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly on that one.
Yeah, my friend Search Warrant Steve did that. And when he got raided in Oak Park, a decade ago, he had a loose leaf folder that color coded with copies of everybody's stuff, and showed them this goes to he educated the cops and they went away.
Well, funny story about that. This goes back to my days of partying and fresh out of college. But we would give out zip ties to people that we checked their ID and they were 21. People that we checked their ID and they weren't 21, they didn't get a zip tie. They still got a cup and they still got to drink from the keg. But when the police came in, they did. We said, no, look, we've checked everybody with an ID and they've got a zip tie. If they don't have a zip tie, they're not supposed to be drinking and you can arrest their ass. And the cops were like, oh my God, these guys really do have their shit together. And they just left. So, tricks of the trade.
Good thing Don Bailey's not watching.
Right.
No, well, man, we could talk to Matt like all day about marijuana and the history and what's going on, but we are running a little bit long, so I just wanted to give everyone a chance to any final thoughts, say goodbye to Matt, and then let Matt send us off as well. So Josh, any final thoughts today? That's the special co-host.
It's just been good to see you and talk to you again, Matt. And thanks as always for your wisdom and guidance. I'm sure there'll be issues coming up in the next year about merging the licenses, and there'll be a lot more to talk about. So looking forward to doing it again.
Cool. Right on. Good to see you, Josh. For sure.
Tom Beller at Real Leaf.
Hey, Matt, just wanted to thank you again for everything that you've done and continue to do at Truu Cannabis Crusader. See you out there.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
Kevin over at Truu Cannabis.
Yeah, Matt, I know we haven't really met, but I've heard about you for a lot of years. I think you're doing a lot of great work. I appreciate everything that you're doing. You've paved the way for so many people, and I look forward to meeting you. I appreciate having you on the show today, and stay safe out there. Okay, buddy?
Great meeting you, Kevin, and thanks for your thoughts about legislation and how we need to keep up on that stuff and not ignore this.
It's not going away. If we don't stay on top of this, they're going to change some shit, and it's going to make it bad for everybody. So
absolutely,
yeah, definitely, you're right on that one. Yep, no problem. Thank you,
Matt. Any words of wisdom for the marijuana world out there?
Well, December 6th is Sunday. It'll be 2 years since legalization. I'm sorry we can't have our annual party at Cannabis Counsel, and those have been some of the greatest in my memory. And so, thank you for being on for having me on the show. I'm really excited that maybe internationally the UN is moving forward. That maybe Congress we can give them a kick in the butt. And at least we'll know how everybody votes on this thing, and we can hold their feet to the fire next time there's congressional races in Michigan in 2 years with new districts. So we'll see. I'm very hopeful, and there's still a lot of work to do. So thank you.
Once again, Matt, thanks for being on the show. And we always talk about us guys, the 08ers, I guess we're called, the people that came in above after 08 and got going. And we talk about the new guys not knowing our history. And what about us knowing the real history before that, the decades? It started with John Sinclair and moved on to all the other people like Matt. And that's a lot. We got a lot of history to remember and record on that. So it's great to have you on, Matt, and everybody else. But with that, we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Ryan. You're awesome.